credit creates buying and stimulation. And everybody wants up. I mean, the government, when they say, I'm now going to give you money, they're going to give you money and credit. It's mostly credit. And they make credit available. And then you go take credit. That's how, when they lower interest rates and they make credit more available, you get your car, you get your house on credit.
Yeah.
Okay. But credit creates debt.
Yeah.
And
which
debt.
Serviced. Yeah.
Okay. So what happens is every time you get one of these, then
a local dip.
They want to give you credit.
Ray Dalio, a renowned investor, hedge fund manager, and philanthropist who founded Bridgewater Associates, warns that the United States is caught in a death spiral of debt, a crisis that, if left unaddressed, could trigger an economic heart attack. Speaking on Moonshots with Peter Diamandis, he explains that excessive borrowing has created a self-reinforcing cycle where the government must take on additional debt just to cover its interest payments. This dynamic erodes investor confidence, tightens credit conditions, and drives up long-term interest rates, making it increasingly difficult for the economy to function efficiently. Describing this phenomenon as akin to plaque in the arteries, Dalio stresses that the key issue is whether debt accumulation generates enough income to offset its burden. If it does not, the buildup of liabilities leads to prolonged stagnation, economic contraction, and eventually, crisis. His latest book, How Countries Go Broke, outlines a predictable pattern in debt cycles. Rising interest rates increase borrowing costs, fueling further debt issuance until a tipping point is reached, forcing a nation into austerity measures or a monetary reset. In a recent post on X, he reflects on how these cycles are often misunderstood, noting that major long-term debt cycles typically span about one lifetime, approximately 80 years, meaning that most individuals and policymakers have never directly experienced the consequences of a full-cycle collapse. The situation in the U.S. is particularly concerning, given the scale of its debt obligations. The U.S. national debt currently stands at $36.4 trillion, surpassing the $29.4 trillion GDP and pushing the debt-to-GDP ratio to 122.97%. Since 2020, federal debt has ballooned by 80%, significantly outpacing the 38% growth in GDP. The government currently runs a $2 trillion annual deficit, equivalent to about 7% of GDP, while interest payments on the debt exceed $1 trillion annually. Despite attempts to stabilize interest rates, the market continues to offload U.S. Treasuries, leading to borrowing costs not seen since just before the 2008 financial crisis. As we bring you clips from Ray Dalio's interview, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
If you look at, let's say, debt to income, it goes like this. And why do we keep going? Why does this thing exist?
No.
And why don't we sort of keep it debt to income more the same? And there are the reasons, politics and human nature you touched on. First of all, credit creates buying and stimulation, and everybody wants up.
But
Okay.
that's historically because the credit employed people that then consume.
Well, when you spend, the government, when they say, I'm now going to give you money, they're going to give you money and credit. It's mostly credit. And they make credit available. And then you go take credit. That's how, when they lower interest rates and they make credit more available, you get your car, you get your house on credit.
Yeah.
Okay. But credit creates debt. So what happens is every time you get one of these, then
a local dip.
They want to give you credit. But it's like giving an alcoholic a shot, or to get him out of the, or an addict, Yeah, okay, you give them a dose, and you get that. And politicians like credit because credit comes before debt payments. So I give you credit, we get in debt, you love me. That's why they want the Federal Reserve and the central government to be separate, to try to do that. But still, what happens is, and that human nature wants the credit. So that's why debt to incomes go like that, this is the government and this is the cycle, and then this is the debt service payments that we're going to have going forward. Yeah, human nature, we all want up. We're all betting on up.
All the time.
Up,
Unless
and
you're in
we're
the hedge,
leveraged betting on up.
unless
We
you're in the hedge fund
borrow
industry.
to buy things that'll go up. The credit system is like the circulatory system in our body, and the blood, which is the credit, brings nutrients all through the system. But what happens is that when it accumulates debt, it's like accumulating plaque in the system because you have more and more debt service that constricts that amount that can pass through the system. Like the government debt service payments are and then you hit a part of it which in markets is called, and this is usually for private creditors, is called a death spiral, a debt spiral. And the debt spiral, what happens is as debt service payments rise so that you have to borrow money to pay the debt, and then the creditor sees that, so they pull back and the credit spread rises. And as the credit spread rises, you have to borrow more money. That is the death spiral. And that's when you see that dynamic, and that's close to where we are in the government debt.
This debt crisis unfolds against economic volatility as the Federal Reserve struggles to balance inflation control with financial stability. While rate cuts have been suggested as a potential remedy, concerns over stagflation, where high inflation coexists with stagnant growth, remain persistent. The housing market, already burdened by soaring mortgage rates, faces worsening affordability challenges. At the same time, global economic shifts add further uncertainty. China's growing dominance in international trade and the BRICS nations' increasing push for de-dollarization raise critical questions about the long-term viability of the U.S. financial system. Deep political polarization is a key obstacle to resolving this crisis, which impedes meaningful fiscal reform. While both major political parties acknowledge the severity of the debt problem, their inability to reach a consensus on spending reductions or revenue-generating measures exacerbates the issue. Dalio calls for urgent bipartisan action, yet he recognizes that entrenched divisions in Congress make such cooperation increasingly unlikely. He advocates for structural reforms to mitigate the risks, including enhanced government efficiency, deregulation to spur productivity, and leveraging artificial intelligence to drive economic growth. However, he acknowledges that these measures alone will not close the nearly $900 billion annual budget gap. He argues that significant spending cuts are necessary, but warns that their implementation could deepen societal divisions, fueling political unrest and economic discontent.
What is so amazing to me, because I've experienced it throughout my life, is everyone pays attention to how they feel at the moment, and they don't see the changes. And the changes, the cycles and everything are so important. And there are certain classic things of euphoria. And yet there are two classic things of euphoria. First, where we are in the economic cycle.
Right.
There's an economic cycle. There's always been an economic cycle, and there always will be an economic cycle. So we are about 65, 70% through the economic cycle that we're in, judging by measures. I won't digress into all of them, though I can if you want. But in other words, the cycle will go on. And in the political cycle, we are in the classic first 100-day honeymoon of the new administration, which is a time of euphoria and is a time that the new beginning begins, okay? So we're at a unusually good moment that if you see it in the cycle, in a cyclical sense, and you say, what is likely? Okay, our aspirations are high because we have capitalism, business, free markets combined with technology to produce that. And the United States is on top of the world, and we should be very optimistic and so on, okay? But first of all, you're not looking at the pricing. So if you look at the pricing of assets in the United States relative to other countries right now, it's expected that that will improve relative to the United States. So there's a hurdle rate. You always have to keep in mind, like it's a horse race. You have to bet on you have to keep in mind the handicap. So, and then if you take the cycle, I bet you, as we take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, do you think you're not going to have an economic downturn? Do you think you're not going to have a bear market? Do you think that everybody's going to be as enthusiastic about how things are going with how the government is handling it? Do you think you're not going to have any of those other problems? Really?
International investors are already reacting to these growing concerns. Reports indicate that foreign governments, particularly China and Japan, have been reducing their holdings of U.S. treasuries, raising alarms about America's dependence on external financing. Credit rating agencies have issued repeated warnings about the nation's unsustainable fiscal trajectory, with Fitch downgrading the U.S. credit rating in 2023. Another downgrade could further escalate borrowing costs, exacerbating the precarious debt situation.
If the debt is denominated in the currency that the central bank can print, you always get the printing and you always get the devaluation of money. And then what happens is then the debt becomes so cheap that it's easy to pay it off. So if you're watching, like Japan is a good example. If you owned a Japanese bond, you would have lost about 80% of your money relative to something stable like, let's say, gold, and you would have lost about 60% of your money relative to a US bond because you got 3% less interest rates and the currency depreciated by almost 4% a year, and that 7% a year is what you would lose. And then what happens is if you're in Argentina, take it to the extreme, you take that debt and you pay it off because it's worthless.
When questioned about the potential economic landscape under different political leadership, Dalio suggests that a Republican administration is more likely to implement aggressive spending cuts. However, he cautions that such austerity measures could have severe social repercussions, exacerbating income inequality and heightening social unrest. The broader geopolitical landscape further complicates economic stability as the U.S. faces internal political turmoil and intensifying global tensions, particularly in its economic rivalry with China and the realignment of global financial systems. The urgency of the situation is underscored by a recent analysis from the Economic Policy Innovation Center, EPIC, which projects that the U.S. government may reach its borrowing capacity limit as early as June 16, 2025. However, Dalio argues that markets will react well before this deadline as investors anticipate fiscal instability and shift their capital away from U.S. assets. If confidence in the government's ability to manage its debt continues to erode, the consequences could be severe: surging inflation, a weakened dollar, and a significant reconfiguration of America's role in the global financial order. As the United States navigates these converging economic pressures, Dalio sees the coming years as critical. Without decisive action, he warns, the nation risks entering an era of financial turbulence that could fundamentally alter its economic standing. The warning signs are clear: rising debt, fragile investor confidence, and an increasingly polarized political landscape create a volatile mix that, if left unchecked, could lead to a full-scale financial crisis with profound and lasting consequences for global markets. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video insightful, Be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with others who need to stay informed about these critical market shifts. Your support helps keep this channel running, and together, we can continue to explore and understand the forces shaping our financial future.